what is your thoughts on like, do you see yourself as a representative of the Latin culture in entertainment? And like, is it a challenge? Do you find it empowering? You know, what is it to be Latino en esta industria? Hello, Lightbox! Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for some coffee with the Casagrandes. I am so thrilled to be here with you guys today and talk about Nickelodeon's newest Emmy-nominated show, The Casagrandes. My name is Magdiela. I'm the production manager for the show. And today we're going to relax, sit back, enjoy our cup of coffee or tea, and talk with two very, very important people on our show who help bring our animated series to life. So let me introduce you to these amazing individuals and my friends. Miguel Puga, co-executive producer and supervising director.
Hello.
Rosemary Contreras,
hello,
staff writer. Hi, guys.
Hi.
You guys excited to be here at Lightbox?
Yeah.
definitely.
I'm super thrilled. And, you know, thank you guys so much for joining me. And today, you know, we're going to talk casa.
Gracias, Magdiela. Hola a todos. Gracias por venir a hablar con nosotros y para conocer un poquito más de nuestro programa, Los Casagrandes. Ahora, ok, para los que no conocen nuestro show, The Casagrandes, it's a story about 11-year-old Ronny Ann and her brother and her mom as they move to the big city to live with their big familia, the Casagrandes. Una familia que es un poco loca, muy divertida, llena de amor, y que además tiene un perro y un perico muy metiche, por cierto, que siempre quiere opinar. The cool thing about our show is that we get to tell stories about a multi-generational Mexican-American family, and we're very proud of that.
Now that y'all know a bit more about the show, we're going to start the panel by showing you an extended daytime Emmy-winning, what's up, main title show open that showcases both the black and white animatic visuals along with the color animation. Enjoy.
I'm in a big city with my big familia. Every day here is my favorite dia. One big house in our family store. Food and laughter y mucho amor. Tíos, abuelos, all of my primos. A dog, a parrot, amigos. We're one big family now. Sundays and Mondays, they're all fun days when you're with us. Casa Grande. Mucha vida. Casa Grande. Bienvenida. Casa Grande. Mucha risa. Casa Grande. All familia. Waking up to the rumbling train, the city sounds that fill my brain. Hitting the street and grabbing my board. It's a big city, so much to explore. Hanging on the block, skating at the park. It's totally fun from dawn till dark. Mercado below me, amiga above. Our Casa Grande is full of love. Tíos, abuelos, all of my primos. A dog, a parrot, amigos. We're one big family now. Sundays and Mondays, they're all fun days when you're with us. Casa Grande. Mucha vida. Casa Grande. Bienvenida. Casa Grande. Mucha vida. Casa Grande. Bienvenida. Casa Grande. Mucha risa. Casa Grande. All familia.
How fun was that? Thank you to our amazing crew and cast working on this Emmy-winning intro. So now I'll kick it off to Magdiela to talk to you about the production process.
Oh my God, we are so excited for our win, right? That was so cool. Well, vamos a hablar un poquito de producción, you know, talk a little about production. Our production is pretty, you know, because we are a 2D show, we're pretty sort of have an idea de cómo queremos el show que sea, así que tenemos the first stage is our writing stage, que toma como 10 semanas por episodio. And then our storyboard takes about 7 weeks per episode. También tenemos el animatic, que dura como 6 semanas. El diseño de blanco y negro y de color dura como 5. Y luego tenemos las grabaciones de voces, que es como 10 semanas después del script final. Y después mandamos nuestro paquete, or like we send our package delivery to our partner studio, Gemfills in Canada. And the animation usualmente takes como 14 weeks. So that's a little bit of an idea, you know. Then we have our post-production, our score that takes about 5 to 7 weeks. So one episode from beginning to end takes 55 weeks. And Mr. Puga is involved in every step of that.
Yeah, it's pretty fun because now during quarantine, I feel like I just worked on one episode last week, and we delivered one episode last week, and it's already coming back fully animated.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's pretty fun to see the process and just see it all the way from the beginning, from when it goes to writing all the way to, you know, just all the ideas that come out of that writer's room. We have an amazing writing team, and just everyone just works so well together, just bouncing ideas off. Then when it gets to us on the board team, we get to punch it up some more and just add some more chistes and more jokes and fart jokes, wherever we could fit. More bumpies and chanclas. You know, off the boards, that's how some of the Rosa, the abuela, she kind of holds the chancla like Thor's hammer. She could wield it and then call it back. So that's where it came from. And then, you know, we just jump over to design. And when it comes to designs, I love, you know, we have a really great team with character designers, background designers, prop designers, effects, color, and, you know, it just comes all together like a big bowl of, you know, pozole or menudo, better. Menudo is better, yeah. And, you know, we just send it over to Jamfield, and they knock it out of the park. We send them the strong posing and backgrounds and color, and they just take that and, you know, they bring it home. And I mean, you know, without them, we couldn't win the Emmy. So
yes, very true. We love our partners.
Gracias.
Yes.
Muchas gracias.
Yeah.
Well, let's bring it back a little bit, kind of, you know, since we're here in production. Hablaste un poquito del writer's room, así que vamos a meternos un poquito más al writer's room con Rosemary, que nos puede dar el chisme de qué pasa en el writer room. Because, you know, once we have that beautiful episode out of that writer's room, and then it goes down this pipeline that we just talked about, you know, they're working on other episodes. So it's not like you know, they're constantly writing and making new stuff. So Rosemary, a ver, dinos el chisme del cuarto de los writers. ¿Qué pasa ahí? Comen.
El misterio, ¿no? Cuando estás afuera del cuarto siempre quieres saber qué pasa, qué está pasando, que el misterioso writer's room. A mí me toca hablarles un poquito de unos de los personajes, cómo hacemos historias y después un poquito de cómo llegamos de la semillita de una idea hasta el último capítulo. So, empezamos con esta protagonista, Ronny Ann. Ronny Ann tiene 11 años. She's into skating, gaming, pranking. But the really cool thing about Ronny Ann es que como muchas niñas que son hijas de padres que han emigrado al extranjero, she's always swerving in between two cultures, right? She always has a little bit of her foot in the door in two cultures. And we get to explore that on the show. So, let's say that we celebrate some American holidays and then some Mexican holidays, or better yet, some American holidays with a Mexican spin, which always happened at my house. So she could have Christmas, you know, and have Santa Claus and have posadas and tamales, and that's perfectly fine. Or for Thanksgiving, in my house, we had arroz y frijoles with the turkey. And you know what? Sometimes that turkey was cooked in mole, and it was delicious. We haven't put that in the show yet, maybe sometime soon. But that's sort of the really cool thing about Ronny Ann, and I think what makes her relatable, not only to the Mexican-American kids that watch our show, but just kids that come from diverse backgrounds. The fact that, you know, Ronny Ann gets it because she's living it right here with us. Now, since I personally was raised with my grandparents, I have a soft spot for Ronny Ann's grandparents, and they're my favorite characters to write for. We have Hector, who is the proud owner of a mercado. He is a storyteller. He loves to play his guitar. Y no es que yo diga que le guste el chisme, pero he sure does know everything that's going on in the neighborhood. And it helps that all of his friends come in and tell him what's up, what's going on. He loves telenovelas just like my grandparents, which I enjoy. And I had a lot of fun with Hector and Ronny Ann in an episode called Señor Glass, where we learned that Hector had sort of a limited education growing up, and he had to start working very early on to help support his family. That was important to me because it mirrored my own grandfather's story, and he really cared about education because he hadn't received it. He wanted to make sure that we did. So in this episode, you had that little bit of heart, that little bit of family, but how do you make it into one of our kid-friendly, super funny episodes? So to flip that, we made Hector go back to school, but literally go back to school with Ronny Ann and Carl. Ah, terror. So of course he comes to the school and gets Ronny Ann in trouble because he's passing notes from the teacher right in front of the teacher, and he pulls out some chones for Carl and hands them to him in the hallway, and it's just our worst nightmare. But we had a lot of fun. I personally had a blast writing that episode. It's one of my favorites, and those are my favorite kind of episodes where we get to tell something that's important to us, a little bit of heart, and then just push the gas pedal on the comedy and the humor and make it super crazy and over the top. Those are my favorite. On the flip side, we have Abuela, who is a gifted cook, and she has a sixth sense about the kids getting into trouble. She always wants to know what's going on with those nietos. She is a little superstitious. Well, okay, no, she's like a lot superstitious. She loves the horoscopes to hear from her favorite, Ernesto Estrella, who is actually voiced by
George Lopez.
George Lopez. I lost his name for a second. George Lopez. She has home remedies for any situation, and she could be at times really, really, really overprotective. So I had a little bit of fun in that, and my mom is too. So I had fun infusing some of my mom's traits onto Rosa for this episode. And in Away Game, when we have Ronny Ann's dad, Arturo, who is a doctor and has been away on his physicians on missions tour. He's been away in Peru for 3 years, and he's just come back and wants to spend more time with the kids. But of course, Rosa's in a panico. Is he going to take care of the kids? Is he going to feed them? Are they going to be happy? And she goes just over the top crazy trying to figure out what's going on with them and spying on them. And at some point, he even releases crickets in this poor man's apartment just in her quest to make sure those kids come back. And of course, they were always going to come back. But my favorite part about that episode is that we showcase that in many of our familias, we really have a three-pronged parent approach, which I call. You have your mom, your dad, and your abuela, because she's the one that's taking care of you during the day. So I wanted to showcase how that was important, and that's a big deal in our families. I also had, on the flip side, I had the joy to watch that episode with my daughter and my mom. And of course, as we're watching it with my mom, she's saying, oh, she's so funny. Esa abuelita, oh, es tan loca. And in my mind, I'm thinking, mira, no se reconoció. But that's okay. We'll leave all those traits with Rosa. But I don't always just poke fun at my family. I poke fun at myself sometimes. We had another episode, and my grandma always cooked for us. She always cooked us breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and it was like homemade food, and it was great. But as kids, sometimes we just wanted to go out and get hamburgers and pizza. It's like, give us a break, abuela. But she was always of the thought of like, why are we gonna go spend good money on bad food when you have the good stuff right here at home, right? And I mean, she was totally right. Now I wish I had abuela's food for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, especially during this pandemic. Are you kidding me? So jokes on me. But in Snack Pack, I got to give Ronny Ann a little bit of that, where she wants to try some delicious tamales from a food truck down the street. And of course, the whole family warns her, ooh, abuela's not gonna like that. But of course, she goes behind her back and then ropes the whole family into wanting to try these delicious tamales. And what I enjoyed about this one is that I got to give them sort of an Ocean's 11 type feel when I really wanted to see the whole Casagrandes in action and see them trying to go on a heist for tamales. And now that I've been talking to you for a good minute, I think it's time to see the Casagrandes in action.
I'm going to play the animatic first and then the final animation. 1, 2, 3.
Wash your plate. Come in. Mama Grande's heading to home base. Copy that. Mercado man, wait for my signal. Ah! Please! Oh, get away! No!
Roger that. Signal to go.
Wait, what? No!
The professor is setting sail. Woohoo! Oh, lady, I'm about to crash into Mama Grande. Oh! No! The truck is on the move.
I'm on it.
There it is. And then I'm going to play the final animation. Ready? 1, 2, 3.
Fashion plate, come in. Mama Grande's heading to home base. Copy that. Mercado man, wait for my signal. Ah! Bees! Oh, get away!
Roger that. Signal to go.
Wait, what? No!
The professor is setting sail. Woohoo! Oh, lady, I'm about to crash into Mama Grande. Oh! The truck is on the move.
I'm on it.
So that was a little bit of the hijinks of the familia going after some tamales. Now, a couple of characters that I will just very, very briefly talk about are some of our guest characters. They're not always here because they're not immediate Casagrandes, but whenever they stop by for a visit, we sure do enjoy having them. We have Ronny Ann's dad, Arturo, voiced by Eugenio Derbez, who is really funny. When we were working on creating this new character, as writers, we weren't sure how the dynamic was going to go between him and Ronny Ann and if we were giving him the right personality. But then we all got the privilege of going to a record and watching Eugenio in action. And when we were just hearing him, he just brought so much warmth to the character, and he just filled in some of those gaps that made us think like, wow, not only did he make our job as writers much easier, but he really did bring that little bit of that magic to the show, and we love that. And then I've also had the privilege of writing episodes for both Ken Jeong and Melissa Joan Hart, who voice Stanley Chang and and Becca Chang, who are the parents of Sid, Ronny Ann's best friend. The cool thing about them is that not only to say Ken Jeong is funny is like the understatement of the year. He is amazing. But with them, we also get to explore a Chinese American family and sort of start delving into those stories as well, which I think is really cool for our show. We've only barely scratched the surface of the Changs, and I hope that as the seasons move forward, we get to enjoy a little bit more of them. So that's a little bit about the characters, but how do we get from that little seed we were talking about to the final script we hand over to our partners, the board artists? So I always was curious before I had started writing. I always wanted to know what went on in the writer's room. So I wanted to demystify a little bit of that. We currently have between 5 and 6 staff writers in the show, depending on the season. And we are on a rotation of 6 weeks. So we know that every 6 weeks we will be pitching and we will be responsible for coming in with a new show idea. We usually bring in around 3 or 4 new premises when it's our turn. And you always bring them in and you have your fingers crossed and it's like, please like one. And I don't care if you've pitched 1 time or 10 times or 100 million times, you will always be nervous. It always happens. And I think that's a great thing because it means you care about what you're doing and you have passion for it. And I think the day that you stopped being nervous is the day maybe you should look into doing something else. But we bring in our premises and we have them for the room and the executive producer, and he looks them over. And usually we go with the idea that has the room rumbling as you're going through it. Like they already start laughing and they already have ideas for it. You know that's the one. So we send that idea, which is usually a little paragraph, by the way. We start off with a paragraph pitch and send that off to the network for approval. And I would say a good 85% of the times we get the green lights. Yes, you're good to go. The other 15% of the time, there's a little bit of pushback, and we have 2 choices. 1, either try to address their concerns and rework, or 2, if they say they really, really want to go in a different direction, then we revamp and restructure. But if we get the green light, we have what is called our story break meeting, which is when we give the full overview of what we think the episode will be about, what's going to happen. We talk about our 4-act structure. And I know at this point you're probably saying, wait, what? 4 acts? I think there's 3 acts. Well, yes, there are generally 3 acts. But for our structure in our show, we break the 3rd act into 2 mini acts, so to give us 4. So yes, it's 3 acts in disguise. We call it 4. But we have, the broad strokes, the big ideas, and then the writer goes off and has 7 days to write an outline individually that then we will bring back to the room, that it will be reviewed again by the story editor and the executive producer, and once again go off to the network for approval. Again, 85% of the time, it will be great. We will get the green light and go forward, but once in a while, there will be, again, pushback, and then you have to go back and rework. We go back and forth many, many times. But if we got the green light, then we get to move forward again, and we get usually between 7 to 10 days to turn that 4-page outline into a 15-page script. And we write individually the first draft of the script, and we'll bring it into the room just to make sure the story is working, everybody's still on board. Again, the executive producer will approve it, and again, it gets sent to the network for approval. Then once they give their notes, we get to my personal favorite step, the punch pass, or the second draft of the script, which is where we go through the script and make sure we can add, if we can add more jokes, we'll add them in. If we can make the gags stronger, if we can make something crazier, and we can always make something crazier, we will do it, except of course when then we get production notes of like, maybe not so crazy, rein it in. And then, we will do our best to go back and forth with that. But once we turn in the second draft, again, we turn it in for one last look and one last approval from the network. And then we finally get to our board draft script, the script that we hand off to our partners, our other half, the board artists.
Yeah, way to go ahead. Thanks for giving all our secrets away, Rosemary.
It's like being in the room with you. Wow, I love that. Thank you for that. Such a great explanation of that. And yes, to be fair, there are a lot of limitations that sometimes writers get because they're notes from the studios, from the executive, and there's always production being like, no more backgrounds. We don't need new backgrounds, locations, or spatial poses with the characters. So that's always something that, writers kind of have in mind since they're beginning their process. A lot of times as a production management person, I tend to sometimes go in the room when they're working on a new season. That's a lot of new locations. So there is a limit, but it's exciting because even with these limitations, our show is so amazing because our writer's room is constantly pushing the limit. And once we have that beautiful script that's beautifully approved and it goes into our storyboards, it goes into our art, now Puga, our wonderful executive producer and supervising director, can tell you more details about that process.
Yeah, so once it gets to
achievement.
Yeah, the achievement. Once we start with the script, we have a director's meeting where we all sit down, myself, other director, and our supervising producer. We'll sit down and we'll try to find out where we could punch up the script or see like maybe last minute changes, like, let's change this location to something we already seen. And then from there, I'll jump into doing some prelims, like there's maybe some new characters in the episode, some new backgrounds, and I have to jump in there and just do them just real quick just to help out the board artists. Whatever I could do to help them out, that's always been my thing. Since I've been working on Loud House, I've always jumped in to try to minimize their workload because, to be honest, board artist is one of the most stressful jobs, but also rewarding at the same time because you get everything you put out there is on screen. And once it gets to the board artists, you have about 2.5 weeks to rough out the board. So they'll go in, it's fine if your characters look like spoons. As long as we could tell what's going on and who the character is, that's all that matters for your rough stage. Some board artists just dive in and already send us like clean up storyboards. I'm like, whoa, that's so cool. But, a strong board artist for me is obviously knows how to storyboard and is, I've always been told this because I come from a boarding background. Storyboard artists are the best at posing because, and it's a plus if you have an animation background too, because where feet positions are going to be, you know where, you know, the next strong pose to strong pose is going to move on to. And our good friends over at Jamfield, like, you know, we want to let them play with our animation once it gets over to them. So we go from one strong pose to the next strong pose, and then they could just fill in like a little antic or just like a blink or, you know, squash and stretch. And what they turn in is just like, they just blow us out of the water. Cause, you know, so I think some people forget that board artists, you know, it's not only going to go to your team, like the designers and everybody else, but it's going to go to the animation studio that they're going to be looking at your board. So, it's a process that we have to get through. And, you know, our show is, you know, it's not a flat show, but at the same time, we get to use flat shots, and we have so much fun with them. We just throw in everything in there, and it's very squash and stretch and very pose heavy show. That's why, you know, when it comes to talking to production or the designers or our art director Miguel Gonzalez, like, he'll be like, "Oh, there's too many special poses." So for me, I would try to go in there and clean up the board as much as I could. That way, like, hey, well, you know, they could just take the drawing and pose it out with the animation studio, Jamfield, and they do that. So once it gets approved through the refs, we'll probably just send a couple notes here and there, and then we pitch it to the network 2.5 weeks later. And then that network pitch, our network executive producers, network producers come in and they check out the board. You know, it's always like, there's times where we have to pause it or go back to it because everyone's laughing because, you know, our shows are so funny, and we give the opportunity to the board artists to punch up the scripts and add jokes. And that's awesome. That's great because, you know, we sit with the board as a board artist. They sit with the board for 6 weeks, and they're in there, they're thinking about it, they're driving home thinking about it, they're showering thinking about it. So whenever they come up with an idea, it's something that, like, that's so funny. It's like so simple, but it's one of the things that sticks. It's one of those moments that it's going to make the audience like laugh. It's like one of those moments where, like, that's funny, and like, you're going to forget about the whole show, about the whole story, but you're going to remember, like, Carl has some chonies, or, you know, it's one of those little moments. It's, you know, it's not like we're trying to compete with the story, but it's just like one of those things that are always going to stick out with the audience because they're funny. And you know, once it goes to the network, it gets approved. We get it. We bring in the cast or the crew. I'm sorry. We bring in the crew. Once it gets approved by the network, we bring in the cast to read all the lines. And, you know, it's always a fun room because there's 13 main characters, and sometimes we'll have everyone in the same room, especially during quarantine. We'll have, it looks like a giant, you know, the Brady Bunch, and everybody's just there talking. Yeah, they're all like using their, you know, sometimes they're in their closet or in the restroom. Not the restroom because it echoes too much, but they're in the closet, or like they have a giant blanket around them. And it's great just to see them. And, you know, I miss working at the studio, but we haven't stopped working since this whole quarantine. And we're, you know, just like the show, just like, you know, every immigrant, we're going to keep going, and we're going to keep fighting. And yeah, that's right. And we just pump them out. We send it, once we record all the actors, we plug them into the animatic, make sure all the timing's right. Sometimes the episodes might be long, so we have to cut them down to 10 minutes, and between 10:45 to 10:55. Yeah, so we try to send it under 11 minutes, and when we send it over to design, designers already kind of know, like, all right, this is cool. There might be some edits later on because the timings might grow. So, you know, the designers jump in, and, you know, I would like to share some of the designs of some of, you know, Snack Pack and this episode that just aired last week in August. Misstep, and just to show some of the posing and some of the color palette and the cleanup design that we use. So here, I'll start sharing that right now. All right, so this is for Misstep, and as you can see a lot of some funny designs here. You see Carlota here falling over, this Lalo licking someone. I can't remember. I'm pretty sure it's Ronny Ann. This is Ronny Ann faking her broken ankle. But just looking at these poses, it's, you know, they're simple enough, but still there's like so much emotion, and so you could tell what's going on, especially with this one. This is like a smash cut of Ronny Ann wearing her folklorico mask. And then when we click over onto this one, this is for the Snack Packed episode. This is Sergio going crazy, shooting up marshmallows at the family. And this is the result of one of them. This is Hector wearing Carl's jacket. Doesn't fit, obviously, and he looks like a plum. He's about to burst. And this is Carlos, who crashed into the wall, and this is Bobby cutting onions. So, you know, like I said earlier, some of the strongest posing comes from the board artist. So it's always fun to take a pose from a storyboard artist and then pose it out to fit the model of the show and of the character. And it's always one thing I always look for for a designer is everyone that could just jump in, dive in into this stuff. And it's really great because we're working with some of my favorite character designers we worked with, and our prop designers are amazing too. Like when we hired everyone, we know they could all do different types of jobs. They could always jump in, and sometimes we do use them for that. Sometimes we have a character designer helping out with storyboards, or designers helping out with, you know, props, which is great because they could all jump in and do all that stuff. Even with our color department, they could all jump in and do this stuff. And now if we move on to the color, right? I'm gonna share my screen to show some of our backgrounds. Welcome to Great Lake City. This is where the Casagrandes lives. Obviously, you can see their building right here with the Mercado down there. The Casagrandes live on the second floor, so we have Abuelo, Abuela, Bobby, Ronny Ann, and Maria, Sergio, and Lalo, the dog, and the parrot, all live on apartment 2A, and right across the hall we have Carlos, Frida, Carl, Carlitos, CJ, and Carlota, all living on 2B. So then, you know, like this whole building here is the focus of this BG, obviously you can see, but this is where our show begins. And I'll skip to, that's our building again. You can see the subway in the background. This is the Mercado. As you can see some piñatas hanging there, some spicy chips, some piggy banks over there. Not pan dulce, right there. And you know, you can see the Lucas, the pelon Lucas right there.
Yeah.
And the paletas in this refrigerator are, you know, they're so colorful. Once we focus in there, there's like paletas de mango, chile, piña, whatever you could think of. And you'll start noticing that some of our colors are we wanted to share what like the storefronts of Boyle Heights and Mexico will look like, and share the same color palette. So you can see there's a lot of pinks, a lot of yellows, pastel colors. The color palettes, they're more vivid and bold, and they're all inspired by, you know, the Frida Kahlo, Casa Azul, Mexican pottery, all the folk art you could think of, the textiles, and especially the luchador mask, if you ever seen some. I'm sure you have. But if you could just pick those colors out and just beautify this city into something that just stands out. And the city, it's his own character now. So, you know, it's a clean, safe city. And that's one thing you can see a lot of, you know, foliage and greenery growing and taking over the city with all the flowers and Margarita's beauty salon. And when we dive into the apartment two-way, this is based off of the house I grew up in at my mom and dad's. Like they always, my parents or my dad would get color and just paint every wall a different color like every other 3 months just because we had it. So sometimes they'll like, oh, there's a brown wall, gross. Or like, oh, cool, there's a yellow wall now. So I always grew up with so much color around me. And that's one thing I really pushed to, like, hey, let's make sure it's always colorful. Like it's, you know, it doesn't matter where you're from. You could always decorate your home into something you want to be sitting in for the rest of whatever quarantine. But the vivid color schemes can be found throughout, like all the architecture, the flowers and food. The goal was to represent the rich and vibrant Mexican culture with color and design. So you'll see, and now jumping into Ronny Ann's room, who used to be a closet, but it's a little bit bigger closet, but we still try to fit in all of her, like she loves skateboards, so we'll fit in all that stuff. You can still see some of the colors still popping, especially with the rug down there. And oops, sorry. And then building, like, you know, if you notice, it's still the same design as the Loud House, but so we're still staying true to the comic book style, the Sunday funnies, and jumping off of that, you'll see a lot of vibrant black, a lot of because we're trying to stay true to that style of comic book. The style to the comic book. So you'll see a lot of familiar shapes within the characters and also within the backgrounds. So the city is, as you can tell, it's all here. And, you know, I'm sure everyone listening, watching, if you could draw this, send us your resume. The more the merrier. We have an amazing background team, and you could tell that like not every line is closing or sometimes they cross. So that's one thing we want to make it feel like it's like, you know, it was drawn by hand, or it was drawn on, you know, for a newspaper. And that's why, and we just add that texture to make it look like a newspaper. So it's always popping. It's always, and I love it because there's so much color in there that I just want to jump in and live there.
Oh, I love that. And I think that you kind of brought it up a little bit, that a lot of this has influence in your house, you know, part of your, you know, you brought, you know, your city, your community. So kind of on that note, now that you guys know a little more about the show, you know about the backgrounds, you know the colors, you know our process a little bit more, you have a better idea of that. I love to kind of get a little bit more to get to know you guys. So let's get a little bit intimate and get to know each other a little bit more, because I think our audience will be super excited to know about everything they saw comes from somewhere, comes from your brains, which is super cool. But you guys, your experience was actually, you know, your personal experience, Miguel, and in your experience, Rosemary, as a writer, they all come together and to make the show. But a lot of it is from your backgrounds, like, you know, growing up, our backgrounds, you know, growing up. I think one of the coolest things about Casa for me is that I'm coming into a production where it's so diverse, but also a lot of Californians, a lot of locals, which is cool. You know, I know like Boyle Heights. Rosemary, I know you grew up also in the area.
I grew up in Pacoima, which is in the San Fernando Valley.
Pacoima, I grew up in Highland Park, California. So I think it's so cool to have that and kind of mold into that. So on that note, let's kind of get, you know, as we're getting, you know, as we're talking about the show, let's also kind of talk a little bit about, you know, ourselves. I love to get to know you guys. I'm sure our audience will love to know you guys and saber un poquito más de tu vida y cómo tu vida fue influenciada en el show, right? Like, how did your life influence the show? So let's start a little bit with Rosemary. Let's talk a little bit more about how did you get started in the industry? Like, ¿cuáles son los pasos que tú seguiste? Because our stories are different, raza, venimos de diferentes backgrounds de todo, nuestra familia, different backgrounds, our family's different. So let's start with Rosemary. Tell us a little more about, like, how did you get into this industry? Like, tips, todo, dime de todo. Yo quiero saber todo, los detalles.
Bueno, hablamos. I grew up, like I said, in Pacoima, and I grew up in the same house as my grandparents. So growing up, if you ever visit Pacoima, and no one ever knows where it is, but it's in the San Fernando Valley. And George Lopez, I forgot your name for a second earlier, and I apologize because you are from Pacoima. Go Pacoima. And if you ever visit there, you'll see that it is a city where a lot of things are in Spanish. All the billboards are in Spanish. Our local supermarket, which I probably can't say the names, but they are, Mexican chains where we can get all of our stuff. Wow. So even though it's not far away from Hollywood, it may as well be another planet because it's totally different. So when I wanted to get into writing, the family, of course, was very concerned because we knew nothing about the business. They knew we needed contactos because they like to watch TV shows about the farandula, and they know that people talk about contactos all the time, and we didn't even know the friend of a friend, the mechanic. We knew no one. So when I went off locally to go to film school here at UCLA, which by the way, I loved, and the second I stepped into that film school and to the first sound stage and they gave me a camera, I was just so happy. I'm like, I have found my place in the world. But I knew going out of there that getting a job was going to be very hard, if not nearly impossible, because again, no había contactos ni palancas, so I had to go out and meet people myself. I had to put in the footwork myself. So when I graduated, I was just trying to get as many odd jobs, quote unquote, business adjacent type jobs. I was a Paramount page for a little while, which I also loved. Being in the Paramount studios is amazing. It was like a giant playground. And though not everything is always fantastic all the time, I just loved being there. But at the time I was also doing transcribing work for HBO and a walkouts project. And I was able to meet Ligia Villalobos, who is like my mentor and fairy godmother, who read my work and just always encouraged me and actually gave me my first opportunity to pitch for a freelance episode on a Nickelodeon show called Go Diego Go. I pitched for that, and then thank gosh, everything went well. So they gave me a second freelance script, and then that one went well. So I eventually came on staff. So that was my first big gig. So it does happen. You prepare yourself and you just put yourself out there and you will find your way in, even if it's a window, not a big door, or just a tiny little crack. You just need that little space and you will make your way in.
Yeah. And Rosemary, can I ask you something? How did you convince your parents to let you go to film school? Like,
I'm not sure I'm not sure they're still convinced. I still talk to my grandparents about what I do, and my grandma says, "Oh, ¿tú trabajas para la televisión?" Okay, that's the extent of what she understands that I do. Okay, that was it.
Hey, Rosemary, by the way, I'm wearing a
La Bamba. He is also from Pacoima, representing Richie.
Pacoima, man. I know. Okay, well, thank you so much, Rosemary. That's really cool. Obviously, we can totally see the influence of Pacoima and the streets and all that in the show, and the Spanglish culture. It's really, really cool. Puga, I know you're, and we all know you're from East LA, Boyle Heights.
Yeah.
But talk a little more about like your neighborhood and your family, your story, and how did you get into animation and in this industry?
Well, I grew up in East LA, Boyle Heights, which is a 10-minute drive to Hollywood, and Boyle Heights is connected and separated by all these freeways. So if you guys have ever been to Los Angeles, we call it the East LA interchange. So we have like 500 freeways just meeting in one area. And so I always grew up next to the 5 freeway. My cousins, I grew up in a rough neighborhood, especially during the 90s. And we were in between like 3 gangs. And our block was like, a safe zone. So I grew up with a lot of the cholo culture, a lot of the, my cousins were in it. And, I just started drawing, and my parents just kept us inside. And I grew up a Nickelodeon kid because my parents knew, like, hey, let's keep them inside because we've seen so many people, especially our neighbors or, my primos and primas that live in the back house who, they ended up joining the gang. And the way they did is just because they would jump over the alley and they're part of the gang, like, hey, here's a spray can. But it was one of those things where they just kept us inside, and I'm sure we didn't have cable. We were stealing it from the neighbors. So during the time when I was a kid, it would static and it'll freeze, and then it'll freeze enough time for me to jump and get a piece of paper and just draw. And so that's how I kind of taught myself how to draw when I was like just a kid. And I remember in kindergarten, my teacher asked us to draw what we wanted to do when we grew up. So as a job. So during the time, my parents would fly us to Mexico every summer or during Christmas. So I always loved being around airplanes. And my dad comes from a boxing side. So like he always had boxing gloves, and we would my brothers and I would throw them on and just punch each other in the face. So like he also had, like a lot of influence. Like, obviously every dad, now that I'm a dad, I want to push things into my daughter. And so our kids like, here, do this or do that. But then, we don't end up doing it. So I drew a picture that I wanted to be a boxing pilot for an aircraft. So I drew an airplane, and then I drew me as a boxer. And then I turned it in as an assignment. And my teacher looked at it, and she said, you're going to fail. You're like, you got an F for this because your job was for you to draw it, not have somebody else draw it. And I was like, that was like the first time I ever got in trouble. And she was like, and she gave it to me, like, who drew this? And I was like, my brother. And I had an older brother, so I had to go home, and I told my mom. And my mom was working at the school, so she knew all the cheese man. She knew what was going down. And she was so mad at me because I didn't say the truth. So the next day, she goes, draw it again. And so I drew it. My mom had like the little picture, like the camera. She took a picture. And then she went, we had to wait like a couple of days for that. And then I finally turned in my assignment, and it was like, he drew it. And so like my mom is based off of Rosa because she's very like, no, like the chanclas. So like, she's, every time I tell her like, hey mom, that's you. And she gets mad at me. I don't have a big nose. So I grew up in this multi-generational family because I have a brother that's 20 years older than I am. So he was my Chicano dad, like my older brother. He was like showing us like how to dress, how to do this. He'll take us to movies. And then my dad and my parents were the ones that were, more traditional, and they're teaching us about our roots and everything and why we always need to learn Spanish, even though I forgot it now. I'm just kidding. I still know it. But just being around and growing up with my abuelita, my primos, my tios, my Nino and Nina, which are my godfather and godmother, they just lived right across the street. All my whole neighborhood, and just seeing like all the different generations, like World War II veteran, or one of the last Jewish families still living in Boyle Heights are just living right across the street. And it's one of those things that I was surrounded by all these characters, and when I got older, I started drawing, and all my cousins would tell me like, oh, hey, like draw me this for this tattoo, or draw me this for this tattoo. And then it got to the point where a lot of my cousins or family and friends were going to coming out of prison. They knew how to draw. So they're like, oh, Miguel, you went to prison to learn how to draw too. I didn't. But they showed me some nice shading techniques that, you know, I haven't drawn on paper, but I'll still use once in a while. But I started getting to tattoos, and I started doing tattoos. I called them Miguel's temporary tattoos because they would fade. So after that, you know, I started getting to. I knew I always wanted to work in animation. I always loved cartoons. There's like a couple comic book stores still around in East LA, which was like, you know, they would only last like maybe, you know, a couple months to a year. And so whenever one would open up, I'll ride my bike and I'll go to it, dodging bullets on the way over. And yeah. And you know, I'll find my comics, and that's one of the first things that I love is looking at the comics. I wouldn't read them. I'll look at the art, and then I'll draw the art, and you know, I'll trace it. And when I didn't have comics, my dad would give me all the newspapers. We had La Opinión, so I would take it and just trace the pictures with a pen. I'll sit there for hours. And you know, just living so close to Hollywood, we would get a lot of people that were lost. They'll exit the freeway and they'll ask the kid. They'll ask the lightest kid for directions, which is me. And I was like, well, I don't know. And, you know, it was one of those things where I started noticing like, oh, like that person has a sticker that says, you know, 20th Century Fox thing. I was like, if they can make it over here, I can make it over there. And so I started looking into that stuff, and I was like, we're so connected. We're so close that I know during the time, a lot of my family members were moving east of, you know, downtown LA, and moving and getting, like, we call them real jobs, like real jobs. And then I was like, no, I want to draw. I want to keep working. My dad was working at Farmer John, you know, and he would come home smelling like the blood and iron. And I was just like, oh, like I see him working so hard, and, you know, his favorite day was coming home to us. And I would ask him, like, do you like your job? And I was like, yeah, it's pretty fun. You know, I could tell, like, you know, the guts and everything for the pigs were the same. And, you know, he started drawing me pictures. I was like, whoa, that's so cool. So my dad couldn't draw. And, like, you know, my dad only went to the second grade before, you know, he had to move to Tijuana. And my dad was a kid selling chiclets. And now that he's here, he became the union leader at Farmer John. And he is what we call, like Hector earlier, we called him the mayor of the city. That was my dad. He wasn't into the chisme, but I'll be walking in the street with my dad, and he'll be waving at people like, hey. And I was like, do you know that guy? I was like, no, but it's nice. And, you know, my dad always said that, you know, invite everyone, give them the food that you have, because that's how you share who you are. And so that always stuck to me. And I always want to share everything I can with my artists and the team that we have, because I think we're all, this show is here for a reason. We're all getting there for all together. And, you know, after that, I went to college. Art Institute's no longer there. I focused in animation, but they kept pushing me into CG animation. So I graduated with a character animation. I walked into a studio. I'm not going to say the name of it. I saw people sleeping under their desk, and I was like, nope, that's not for me. And I wanted to draw. So, you know, one of the first things I did, luckily, they always say when you're going to school is everyone around you in your class, look at them, you're going to end up working with them. And it's true. Right now, you know, I graduated in 2008. 10 years later on this show, I got to hire 2 people I went to college with, and they're still working with us right now. And I think it's one of the greatest things, because we all saw growing up, going to college together in our Dragon Ball Z shirts, and now we're working together and with our Dragon Ball Z toys in our studio.
Amazing. What a great story. I didn't even know a lot of those details, Miguel, and I know that's really cool. And obviously we can see it on the show, the influence of that on the show. And I think that's amazing. Just to kind of throw it out there for people out there. So Rosemary talked a little more. She went to UCLA for film school, and then Miguel Puga went to the Art Institute, which is no longer there, but it's an art school. So they are, they're different paths, but it kind of leads you to the same industry if that's what you're looking for. I myself went to community college. I went to Pasadena City College and studied television production there because I am a local from Highland Park who I could not afford. I was also dodging bullets in the 90s. So there's no way I could afford to go to college. I'm the only child, and it was one of those things where like the path is different for everyone, but if you really, really want it, you really, really work hard and you really go out there and put those contactos and start being like, hey, oh, aquí estoy. Gente se va a acordar de ti. So there's different paths, but it's a way to do it. Whatever your path is, don't be afraid of just keep trying and trying. And if you really, really, really want it, you're not going to want to stop, right? Because that's what you want to do. You want to continue. So those are great, great stories. Let's talk a little more about like as being Latinos, porque obviamente un show es un show que está haciendo historia, it's making history, porque es el primer show que es Mexican American story, una historia mexicoamericana, no necesariamente latina. En este caso, como pueden ver, casi la mayoría de nosotros en el show somos mexicoamericanos, así que la historia es basada en nuestras experiencias que son mexicoamericanas. So no es necesario una historia en Mexico. For people who are out there that you're like, hey, we don't do this like this in Mexico. That's true, because, we're kind of telling our story. This is an Angelino story, LA, California, US, American story, right? So, siendo Latinos en América, ¿cómo te sienten? Like, what is your thoughts on, like, do you see yourself as a representative of the Latin culture in entertainment? And like, is it a challenge? Do you find it empowering? What is it to be a Latino in esta industria?
I don't see myself, but I do see what we put out there as a representation. So for me, it's always about the power of reflection. Growing up, you didn't have, brown characters as like a main character. You always had them as like the best friend or incident, or like once in a while they'll pop up. So like we always felt like we weren't being seen or heard. And, sometimes you don't feel validated, especially in cartoons or especially in live action and movies and TV. So sometimes for myself, I don't know if I could speak for anybody else, I felt like I was un-American growing up because it's like, that's not me. That's not how I grew up. I know I don't go camping. Or
yeah, but, camping.
it's
movies.
Yeah, I don't have a yacht.
The beach was like the most we did, and it was like a big deal.
It was, and we would stay there the entire day.
So
and everything.
You set up, right? You'll have like a big tent thing. You'll bring your own food. You never buy food outside.
Right.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, but we have a great opportunity to showcase that it's okay, like to showcase this Mexican American Latino bridge into our home with this show, and it's also great that we get to speak to the next generation that's watching this, because especially with what's going on today with the world and everything, this generation that's growing up watching this show, they're going to be like the strongest leaders we were going to have. And it's great that they're watching this show and like, hey, that's normal. That's fine. Like, it's okay. And also it's going to spark everybody else that wants to pitch a show like this. Like, hey, it's very similar that what I'm watching, like being, I'm watching this show about Mexican American family, but like, oh, maybe someone's from like, Vietnam and they're watching, like, hey, we do kind of that. Like we're kind of similar, but we're different too. So this is going to open up so much stories and opportunities for everyone to pitch, and we can't wait to explore all these shows, because this show is a melting pot of all these characters, and I'm so lucky that we got to hire this diverse crew to come in and share their stories with us.
Yeah, that's amazing. Right, it's gonna be like Casagrandes meets blank. That's such a
Yeah.
cool experience.
Right.
Rosemary, have you encountered a little bit of like, you know, some obstacles being Latina, or that you turn into a success, or do you feel that that's never been something that you had to worry about?
Well, I think that like more specifically, sometimes you have to do a little more explaining with some stories. Like recently, you know, let's say I wanted to do an episode about El Raton, and you know, they're very familiar with the tooth fairy, and then you're trying to explain that we have our own and it's a rat. They're like, wait, it's a rat, and you're like, no, well, it's a mouse, and you know, he does his thing, and it's our thing. So there's just a little more explaining of things sometimes. But you know, just not letting go of that idea just because someone's not understanding of it the first time around, you know?
Yeah, that makes sense. And kind of talking about, you know, the characters and that we're building in this world. Obviously, you know, Puga, you brought it up a little bit, that it's important to bring these characters from different lives and walks, you know, to be representative, you know, of our world. You know, diversity is what makes, you know, engaging this unique story, especially important for kids, you know, to see themselves on cartoons, movies, and books. Can you talk about the Mexican American characters that were specifically created, and the decisions that you guys kind of put together to create these characters, you know, and what are they based on?
Yeah, it all started with maybe 2013, working on the Loud House. I worked on my very first episode of Lincoln, who was getting bullied. We later on find out that he's being bullied by a girl. The girl ends up being Ronny Ann. We never see her. So that was my first episode, and we were supposed to introduce her, and I saw a picture of her. She was a redhead with the yellow sweater. She looked completely different. And I saw that picture, and I was like, man, Lincoln has like 3 redheaded friends already. Like, they're already part of his friends. And I was like, why can't you make her Latina? And like, I just planted the seed, and sometimes those seeds take a while. A couple months later, I saw the new Ronny Ann, and she, you know, she was a little Mexican American girl, which is great because I was trying to push that idea to, you know, I just had my daughter. My daughter was maybe not even a year when I started working on the Loud House, and I just wanted her to grow up seeing herself represented. And, you know, like I said, I planted that seed and it worked. And then after that, you know, I sat with the writers because they wanted to do a one-off episode of Ronny Ann moving to the city. And I pitched them how I grew up. I pitched them how I grew up in a multi-generational family. I gave them descriptions of my dad, my brother, my mom, my tios, my tias, my cousins, myself. And, you know, a lot of that stuff came from like, oh, you know, Carl and Bobby is a mix of me. And if you see the original drawing of Bobby, he looks like me, big old head. It's just one of those things that just started sparking ideas. And then, you know, they took that. I grew up in a rough neighborhood. The cats ended up being the gang of cats. So they always have to watch out for the cats. So in that first episode, Relative Chaos, you'll see like they're always dodging the cats. And, you know, some of the characters came from just like, you know, we didn't want to do any stereotypes. I pitched them how, you know, how I was growing up in my household. And then we had the writers come in and just kind of mold these characters into what they were. Obviously, we made them look like, you know, I showed them pictures too. And, you know, they're like, oh, we could do this and this and make them look like that. And, you know, I come from a long line of Miguels in my family. So that's where the Carl and Carlos and Carlota's name come from.
And fun fact, we have a lot of Miguels on our show.
No, we do. We almost had 4, but I was like, no, it's too confusing. But Frida is based off of Frida Kahlo, and, you know, she's a Frida Puga Casagrandes. So I didn't name her, the writers did. So, and, you know, like, we're still staying within the same you know, world of Loud House, how the pets are named after certain famous cartoonists. So Lalo, our dog, is named after our Lalo Alcaraz, who's our consulting producer, and he also writes on the show. And Sergio, the parrot, is named after Sergio Aragones from Mad and Gru, The Wanderer. He's one of my influences. I love his work, and it's so great to have these two animals represent one of my favorite artists, except for Lalo. Lalo's not my favorite.
Yeah, I mean, the representation on the show is amazing because we're not only representing the Latino culture, right? We're also, with the CJ Casagrandes, we're also bringing in Down syndrome. We work with a consultant from the National Down Syndrome Society to ensure that we're getting the right portrayal and accurate, just like Lalo is our consultant for anything that is accurate for Latino, Mexican, Chicano culture. So a little bit about that, Rosemary. How is it to write for those characters? Because we have we have CJ, who is wonderful and one of my favorite characters. We have the neighbors and the neighborhood. And there's so much diversity with our neighbors, everybody around. So can you talk a little more the writing process of those characters and kind of how do you do that?
Well, for CJ specifically, and you did mention us working closely with the Down Syndrome Society, not only to make sure that we are portraying him accurately, but also that we go beyond saying CJ, a boy who was born with Down syndrome, because he is so much more. He is a cousin, he is a friend, he has hopes, he has dreams, and he should be as well-rounded as some of the other characters. And though we've only begun to explore a little bit, chipped away at CJ, I do hope that we get to have even more stories with CJ coming up. So
more pirates and more CJ in our show. I love
definitely. And we are also always working to try to make the whole neighborhood more diverse. We mentioned Margarita before, who's from Puerto Rico, and she has a beauty salon. And we have Vito, who is one of Hector's close friends. He is Italian. And, we just try to have as many backgrounds as we can as we add more characters.
Yeah, and actually, fun fact, a lot of the sort of background characters are based on a lot of our crew members as well early on, so that's really cool. I haven't seen one with pink hair yet, but you never know.
It's in the works.
It's on the works. No, but honestly, guys, thank you so much for just kind of spending some time with us and talking about these amazing characters and world that you guys build. That we get to work on, and characters and stories that obviously come from your background, from your story, but also are important to people that are watching, because it's not necessarily a Mexican American story, it's a diverse story. The immigrant story is very common. We have a lot of Asian Americans working on our show. A lot of our artists, are Asian American. It's really cool because our cultures are very similar. So it's really fun to work for a show where someone like Miguel Puga and someone like Rosemary Contreras can come and bring their talent together to create something amazing that also has a big impact in other cultures and other, minorities. So thank you guys so much for your time today. I hope that you guys are able to check out our show. And if you guys, where can we find you guys? Where can we find you guys? Like, if you want to stay in touch with you, we're like social medias, where can we find you? Miguel, you have at.
Am I pointing at it?
Puga Vida. There you go.
Puga Vida. Okay. And Rosemary, where can we find you or learn about
I am not super up on the social media, but I do have a little LinkedIn. That's all I have. So sorry, guys.
You can always find me on social media at Magdiela Duhamel. Thank you guys so much for being here. I want to kind of end with one quick thing, because I want to know what you guys get super excited to work on the show. Like, let's wrap it up on that. What excites you the most to work on Casa?
Working with all of you, that's what excites me the most. Is we're all familia, and it's always fun to work at a place where you're comfortable and you feel safe, and it's always something I always want to push for. And stress-free. If someone's stressing out, all hands on deck to help out. And that's what I love to do.
Nice.
And for me, it's a little more personal. I have an 8-year-old daughter, so she's our target audience. And whenever a new episode of Casagrandes that Mama wrote is going to be on the TV, it's a big celebration. We make a little party of it, and we have a good time. So just to see her light up that way when she sees one of our new episodes is awesome.
Oh, that's great. I love working with all of you. I love the diversity on our show and our crew. And yes, it's super cool to be part of our show that creates a Latina main character on Nickelodeon. I mean, come on, we were all Nick kids, so it's really exciting. Well, thank you to you guys. Thank you, panelists, and everyone who joined and listened and, you know, share with us. We did have a lot of fun talking. I learned so much from you guys and learning about Casagrandes. If you'd like to know more about the show or working on Nickelodeon, please follow us on Instagram. Do check out our Nickelodeon Animation Studio site. It's full of great information, including our Nick production opportunities. And even our site includes some of the great behind the scenes footage, our creators, some, you know, bunch of stuff that is really cool. So thanks again for joining us today. I hope you had fun. Muchísimas gracias y que tengan un buen día.
Goodbye, future coworkers.